Do you like doing ridiculous amounts of instantaneous damage? Easy peasy. So, let's explain the skill tree. Why did I decide to go with such a wacky setup which involves Golems and the Elementalist to make a Discharge build of all things? Well, I'll tell you. The Elementalist has very good access to very powerful effects of the Golems. Most notably here from these two ascendancies, you'll see that not only do I get a very large amount of effective buffs, I also get a +2 like additional maximum Golems. When you combine this with the tree, you get actually +3 to your maximum Golems and a complete boatload of effective buffs on them. I mean, the thing with Golems that's particularly advantageous is it's not really so much the damage from things like the Lightning Golem or the Ice Golem, or even the Flame Golem for that matter. You also get access to a lot of defensive abilities from things like the Stone Golem, the Chaos Golem, and of course, crucially, the Stone Golem of Safeguarding. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. Other benefits for Elementalists, you have this node here, Bastion of Elements, which is just very, very good for helping your physical max hits, and all max hits for that matter. So I'll go back here for a second. And also you get Mastermind of Discord, which just is a very, very good way of increasing the amount of exposure that you can give to the enemy. I mean, an extra -25 is a very, very noticeable difference. Okay, so how about the rest of the tree? The initial concept that went into making this build was, I thought to myself, how can I make it so that I can generate charges in such a consistently high and more reliable way as possible? One time while I was at work, I remembered while I was reading the PoB wiki that this ability exists inside of the Elegant Hubris Timeless Jewel in the Victario variant, you might say. What does this do? Supreme Grandstanding. Nearby allies and enemies share charges with you. Enemies hitting you have a 10% chance to gain an Endurance Frenzy or Power Charge. This thing helps very, very significantly with your charge generation, and since we're playing a Discharge build, it's of extraordinary importance and very, very, very beneficial. To be honest, I don't know if this is actually a little bit bugged, because I don't tend to find that the enemies really are generating any charges at all. It says you share them with the nearby enemies, but I mean, to be honest, I've never even noticed. If that is bugged and GGG patch it, you can very easily fix it by just switching here. You having the charge mastery, nearby enemies cannot gain any form of charges, so that makes a big of a difference. I mean, you will lose a little bit of damage, because here I've gone for the 3% increased damage per charge, but it's not really that much. But I mean, when you're doing when you're doing 57 million in an average hit, just going down to 52, it's not really that much of a big deal. You can go this if you want, but until this gets looked at, let's go here for a bit of extra damage, eh? So that's for the rest of the tree. As I mentioned, my original idea was to make a sort of Zoomancer type build where I use Power Charge on critical and use the what are they called? To use the spectres, which give you frenzy charges, so just constantly amp up all of these charges and use the minions as a sort of battery. I called it the Spirit Bomb build, because the idea here is like Goku taking energy from the surrounding areas and the surrounding people. They offer their energy to Goku and he just blows up the entire screen with one giant Spirit Bomb. Hence the somewhat corny choice of name here. Anyway, as for the build. So I've gone for this Elegant Hubris Timeless Jewel. The purpose here is not only does it give you Supreme Grandstanding, you also get some very nice benefits from things like 10% like chance to gain a Frenzy Charge on hit. Massively helps with the charge generation. Especially with a Frenzy Charge on hit, you can combine this with the Mark bonus here, where you get a 10% extra Frenzy Charge generation whenever you hit your marked enemy. Very, very, very nice. Other nodes that are very valuable here, and the reason why I went with this seed is just because it has a very high amount of density of effective points that are very close to the starting tree of the Witch. So what else do you get? You get 80% increased spell damage. In my configuration, in my build, I have 8 charges. That's my maximum number. So I have 8 Frenzy, Power, unfortunately not Endurance. I think I only have about 5 of those. So in this particular build, 80% increased spell damage is actually the same as 10% increased damage for Power Charge. If I was one of these super rich people that could afford an 11 Power Charge setup, by all means I would. But I'm not a Mirror Crafter. In fact, I've only been playing the game for 2 seasons, 2 leagues. So this is all very new to me, but still a lot of fun. Anyway, what else is on here? So again, just another damage node. Again, very high density of effective nodes that we use here. You don't have to use this exact seed, and to be honest, you don't have to be in this position. I was originally here earlier in the tree, but the issue is you spend a lot of points getting here, and it's the amount of points that you have to invest to get to any of these nodes was just a lot higher than it would be from the Witch's starting position. So this one saves a lot of points. Okay, what else do we have for the build? So this 10% frenzy charge on hit in combination with this, and in combination sometimes with the, I believe it's called the Alchemist's Mark, or the Poacher's Mark, sorry. I sometimes use that if I feel like I need to get a bit more frenzy charge generation, but I often find that these 2 nodes are more than enough. As for power charges, there's many ways to generate those. You can generate them through this Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh combination here, which gives me an extra power charge, but it also gives me a power charge whenever I gain mana. I'll talk a bit about charge generation in a little bit actually, because that's related to the items. Other things here, I've just mostly gone for damage nodes on the staff because the Annihilating Light is a staff. Here we got a fire node, which the purpose of this is just to give life regeneration. As you can see on, if I go back to the normal setup here, it gives 229 life regen. When I'm using Petrified Blood, my effective maximum life here is only 1,345. It's actually very beneficial to have, well, more than 10% life per second there. Some life nodes, aura effect here because we're stacking quite a lot of auras in this build. Here I've gone for these mana nodes purely for the reservation and the effect of Arcane Surge. This means that when you're using very high mana cost abilities like here, I'll go out on here of course because I'm not generating Arcane Surge by attacking any enemies. As you can see, the mana pool is very, very low, so Arcane Surge just helps with the charge generation, as I showed in the video earlier. The rest of the nodes here, we've invested in our Frenzy, Power and Endurance charge here with a Forbidden Flame Jewel down in that area. Put some points down here all the way into another Endurance charge because Endurance charges are just completely ridiculous this patch, and they're already pretty good last patch, and now that they give Elemental reduction as well, they're just even more powerful. Same story for the right side of the tree. I've gone all the way down to get the maximum power charges. Don't need the Frenzy because we're running the, what's the amulet? The Badge of the Brotherhood amulet, so my Frenzy charges and power charges are the same. Mark here is just good for, the Mark here and the Mark Mastery is mostly for Frenzy charges. Again, it gives a very nice damage boost. Let me switch the configuration. If you're wondering why I keep switching configurations here, it's just because this is a weapon swap build. If that wasn't already immediately obvious. Okay, so the other benefits, I've gone for these 2 lightning nodes here, and I'll explain why. This one purely because it's very easy to give shock on this build because we have a lightning setup, and of course Discharge itself does a high amount of lightning damage. So you just get, it really helps with the initial charge generation when you can constantly get crits on enemies. I mean, look at this, 100% increased critical strike chance against shocks enemies. You're applying shocks all the time. This is actually very easy. And once again here, you just get critical strike chance against enemies of lightning exposure, which you're also proccing all the time. Same story for this thing here. We've gone for static blows, and the purpose here is we want to be able to amplify the amount of shock we're applying to the enemy. This is actually a bit unexpected to me, but I found out towards the end of when I was developing this build that you can actually get an 85% shock, a complete max shock on Shaper. The reason why this works is because in one of our skill setups we use Crackling Lance of Disintegration in combination with Unbound Ailments and Overcharge, and I believe I have a video on here which I will share in a moment. So this is from an earlier, slightly earlier version of the build where I was testing out Eldritch Battery. It's mostly the same except for I was using I think I was using a Bitter Dream at that point. You can see by the gigantic number of modifiers on my Ice Lance here. But I just want to showcase you the power of the Crackling Lance of Disintegration. A quick little review of the PoB here. Check this ability out in case you guys haven't seen it before. This thing gives a plus 20% to your maximum effective shock. Combine that with the plus 15% that we're getting from the tree. it actually means we can get up to 85%. And actually, I'm quite happy to say, if we watch this little shaper clip here, forgive the scuff mechanics, I'm not too used to this guy. So it starts off at 53 and then boom. I think you might have missed that for a second there. We can actually get a 24% shock, sorry, 24% chill, and an 85% shock on Shaper. Now, in many cases, this would just be unnecessary because I think in my configuration, what is it? I've got my shock duration up to, where are we at? Where's shock duration? Ah, there we go, 3.4 seconds. So I thought it was a bit more than that, but never mind. 3.4 seconds is a reasonable amount, but if you're not using a discharge build and you're using something where you had to, let's say, do a lot more damage over time, a lot more sustained damage, this would be significantly less effective because the shock would fall off. Well, rather, I should say, the investment that it would take to apply the shock, you're losing damage uptime. But in this case, because we need to build charges anyway, you're actually able to quite consistently and reliably get up to an 85% shock, which massively just butters people up for gigantic amounts of discharge. Which I suppose, while we're on that topic, I'll get to the configuration here. That's why in this configuration I have shock at 85%. I also have, in this case, up to 10 seconds of chill. The main reason being, I don't think that freeze is very reliable in this build, particularly because we're using like an ice lance that only has the sort of greater multiple projectiles and returning projectiles. But we can chill very, very reliably. As you saw there, chill's very easy to apply. This thing ramps up very quickly, and you also get benefits from this part of the tree here, where we have this mastery. Enemies permanently take 1% increased damage for each second they've been chilled by, or to a maximum of 10%. So every time you're applying these chills, you know, that's just like a permanent increase. Let's say that time in the Shaper, I was probably at about 4 or 5 seconds, something like that, before I used my discharge. Again, 55 million. And then as soon as we're at the maximum amount, 1085, yeah, we can go up to 57. This is very, very easy to apply, trust me. You can apply it on Shaper, you can apply it to pretty much anything in the game. Well, I will admit I haven't actually tested this with Ubers yet. I haven't really tried anything with Ubers, actually. I did theory craft some kind of crazy build with a cast on death setup and an immediate deletion, but I just haven't had the time to do that. Okay, so back to the tree. So the shock, the purpose of the shock here is just because you can very easily apply it to a maximum cap, even on Pinnacle bosses. Very, very nice. What else have we got? So because we're using Petrified Blood, the Petrified Blood has 2 benefits. One is it allows us to consistently use Pain Attunement, which of course gives 30% more spell damage, and because we're always on low life in this case would be 55% because we're combining it with the Life Mastery, which gives a bit of extra defense. I do like Petrified Blood because it gives you quite a lot of tankiness when you're on low life, and since I've already got pretty high amount of life regen, it just massively improves with the overall feel of the defensiveness. This build is tanky. It's not like massively tanky, and I've never really played any armor stacker or anything that's massively tanky like by broadly accepted standards, but in my opinion I think it's pretty tanky. You're more than welcome to try it out yourself. Any other points? I believe that's covered just about everything. The purpose here, of course, is we're just using buffs with golems, we're using elemental ailments, which we can very, very easily apply. We're building up charges, we're using the damage we get from our marks, and a few life nodes and the other things. You will notice that I'm at level 92 with this build, and the main reason being I just really haven't grinded any further than that. But if I was to go to level 100, I'll put 3 points into this here, so we get the extra life regeneration. Might as well put 2 points here just for further survivability, and then just 2 points here, why the not. And then we have one more for, I don't know, whatever you want. Life. Actually, no, we can put it here. So then the final case of this build would be like this. 22,000 max physical hit, that's not bad. And that's actually not including the steel skin that I've got enabled. Where's that? Where's my steel skin? Ah, there we go. We enable steel skin and then, yeah, we're going to get to 30,000 max hit. These are pretty damn big numbers, and on 3,000 life, you have to admit it's pretty damn effective. At least I think it is, in my humble opinion. But of course, we disable steel skin because we don't like padding defensiveness, do we, guys? Okay, now we bring a good point to talk about the skills. So as I mentioned, this is a pretty conventional discharge setup with regards to damage. It's elemental penetration, crit, arcane surge. Arcane surge you can swap out for elemental focus if you want. The main reason being we mostly apply our elements through the use of the Ice Spear and the Crackling Lance of Disintegration. But I just prefer to have Arcane Surge, mostly because it's sometimes the freeze that you get from using Discharge on enemies is just kind of useful. But you can take that off if you want. Power charge on critical because, interestingly, it actually has a more damage multiplier depending on the number of charges you have. I don't think I didn't notice originally. I thought it was quite surprising, but yeah, also helps with the charge generation a little bit. Concentrated effect I use for bossing, but if I'm just generally mapping, I'll use increased area of effect instead. You do lose damage, but for mapping, you won't really notice it very much as long as you're building up charges very consistently. Elemental focus, yeah, I already mentioned that. In terms of auras and things like that, so I'm currently running Zealotry on Guardian's Blessing. The main reason being you can get very high uptime with this because you use these minions here. Where are they? I messed up this a little bit. 1 second. Kind of messed this up. Forgive me, everybody. Whoop. This is a mess. Okay, I'll clip this bit. So here I'm going to show an uptime tech that you can use with, to be honest, any of the golems out of the transfigured version that have the of hordes sort of suffix to their title. I've done this with just 2. You can do it with a bit more if you want a bit more uptime, but the way it works is you summon one of these and then you cast your Guardian's Blessing. In this case, I've got Zealotry. The main reason being Zealotry is just used for damage anyway. I wouldn't recommend this for defensiveness because, you know, inconsistent defensiveness is a bit annoying, especially if you want to go for hardcore. But as for the actual way this works, you use Zealotry with 1 alive. Now this will slowly drain its health, and once it gets to about 50%, I summon the other one. Again, I've only got 2 alive, so I'll just do this one by one, and then voila, we have full uptime on our Zealotry. And now back for the skill setup. One of the primary ways we generate charges is simply by using Ice Spear. So we have Ice Spear set up with power charge on critical, greater multiple projectiles and returning projectiles. This thing procs a massive amount of hits, both on the outside and on the return. I originally had a different setup where I was using kinetic bolt fragmentation. The downside with that is when you're using attacks with wands, you have to build up quite a lot of accuracy, and it's a bit annoying to try and keep that balanced when you don't necessarily need to. It does give the advantage of being able to use the Holy Relic for even more health regen, but I just didn't find it as very necessary. This setup here we have, I'll talk a little bit about the golems actually. So my choice of golems, I'll do this in game, it's a bit easier. So because of the amount of buffs, we're actually allowed to have 4 golems, but for those that don't know, when you have any of the of hordes golems, you can have 2 of those without sacrificing your golem number. So whatever your golem limit is, you can just add a +2 of any sort of hordes golems. If you go to +3, then it will delete one of your golems automatically. So why these choice of golems? I use the stone golem primarily just for health regen. It gives about, I think about 700, something like that on its own. Originally it's like 100, 150, 200, but with the massive amount of effect that we get, it makes a very big difference. Chaos golem, of course, because that ends up giving about, I think, 24-25% physical damage reduction, something like that. I have a lightning golem in my current setup, but that's only because I'm playing around with it. I would actually recommend that you use the Ice Golem. It gives you significantly higher amounts of crit. I was just testing some setup with a crit flask rather than if I don't use a crit flask in this setup because I'm using a mage blood and I can get away with not using one. But if that wasn't the case, then I would absolutely use the Ice Golem, significantly more reliable. But one of the most crucial parts of this build is, in fact, here the Summon Stone Golem is safeguarding. This thing's an absolute beast. I think I first saw this from one of Creparian's videos, but if you see what this does, it effectively acts like a massive health battery for your melee damage. Now you'll see this number here is the amount that it's actually taking away from physicals, like from melee hits that hit my character. This is the amount of the damage from those hits that's coming from the Golem's life first. And this makes you significantly more tanky against melee hits. Not so much against projectiles, of course, but when you're getting hit by lots of melee things, by lots of small mobs, by lots of breach monsters, or by the let's say lots of essence monsters, which are very, very juiced up with things like Soul Eater and things like that. This makes a massive difference. They do have the downside that they have 50% less life than a normal golem, but to be honest, I found that they're very, very durable. And because we are using an Elementalist, just to go back to the tree for a second here, we actually the golems are revived after 4 seconds anyway. Where's that one? Oh yeah, summon golems are resummoned 4 seconds after being killed. So you don't have to invest too much in golem defenses. This actually makes it very, very, very efficient. They're already immune to elemental damage, and they're already revived after 4 seconds anyway. So even if while you're mapping some of these die, they come back very, very quickly. You almost won't even notice it. You might notice it if the health regen golem dies and you're wondering why you're losing a bit of health, but the tankiness of this build's pretty good. Okay, so now let's go back to the skill setup a little bit more. The flame golem you can turn on and off if you need to. I just use it for bossing. You can swap this for the stone golem of safeguarding if you like, because you don't really need the melee damage reduction when you're fighting against some map boss. It's just not necessary. Crackling Lance, I think I already explained. Unbound ailments overcharge, just to apply the maximum effective shock. Very, very helpful. This is mandatory, by the way. If you want to apply full shock, you need to have this set up. I think all of this is mandatory. It's very, very well optimized. For movement skill, I just use Frost Blink of Wintry Blast. The main reason being it just allows you to go around the map like this. Very, very convenient. The annoying thing about it is it has a cast time. So if your cast speed is not very high, or if you have a very, very low stun threshold, it can get extremely annoying when you're getting stunned while you're trying to run away. So you might want to use a different ability rather than this. I just use it because I like it. It's kind of fun. I would use Leap Slam if I could, but alas, I don't have such a luxury. Convocation, I have linked, well, I have an automation set up linked to Steel Skin and Convocation, sorry. I do have this on my shield, so there is one slightly irritating thing that you might find is that when you are about to use Discharge, which by the way requires a weapon swap, the idea here is you'll have to reactivate the automation every time you do this. It's a bit tedious, but you kind of get used to it after a while. So the idea here is you're running around mapping. In fact, actually, I'll just show you a little showcase. Why not? So, very, very quick demonstration for those that are interested. Let's just do some blood aqueducts. The idea here is, of course, I'm running around the map, throw a few ice spears, and you'll see that my charge generation is very, very, very high. Oh. My full charges already. Or you can actually, to be honest, you get enough hits with this thingy that I can just go around hitting this. See, makes a big difference. And then, of course, boom. Excellent. Oh. So back to the other skills. Excuse me, everybody. Elemental weakness is just an extra curse. I do actually have a dual curse set up here, which I'll talk about in a little bit. For some reason, where's my Righteous Fire? Yeah, I've got Righteous Fire. So the last skill here you'll find in these areas. I do have a Purity of Elements set up. The main reason being because of the Annihilating Light, which gives massive reductions to your defenses, mostly to your elemental resistances. It's very, very important to keep those capped. And Purity of Elements just helps with things like your shock resistance, your ignite resistance, that type of thing. Grace is very important over armor because I am running the lightning coil, so I don't tend to need armor as much since I've got so much conversion. The Grace just helps with the survivability, and I want just enough to get me above 52%. Righteous Fire, I activate just purely because it gives 39% more spell damage. I would recommend you only really use this for bosses, to be honest, because it's just unnecessary to have this amount of damage. And if you see, as soon as I use this, it depletes my energy shield almost immediately. It will keep my health to the sort of petrified blood threshold, but it cuts your regen by about half, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it cuts it off by about 400, 300, something like that. This is in the level 99 setup. 1 second, I'll take this away. So it does make a big difference to your regen. I would recommend only using it for bosses, or if you just want to map really fast, it's kind of fun to just turn on this and just run around the map like this, killing things very, very easily, because you will build up charges that way. It's actually quite easy to do so. And I think that just about covers it for the skill setup. I don't think there's any interactions that I haven't explained. I am running 2 cursors. I'll explain that in the item section, but the majority here is just we're using some auras. So we're using Guardian's Blessing, lots of Golems here, which mostly for buffs, but they also help with charge generation. Shock we apply from Crackling Lance. Primal Aegis is cast from the Ascendancy. We have a Convocation setup of Steel Skin. If I turn this on, by the way, yeah, we get a much bigger difference to our effective hit pool. And Ice Spear again for charges, some Golems, Petrify Blood, Frostbinkler. Now finally I'll talk about the item setup. It's very, very crucial I explain how to play this build from the item side, because this is quite an intricate build. It's quite intricate in the sense that if you pretty much don't follow a lot of these things exactly, or at the very least you know why things are configured in a certain way, you will notice a very, very big loss of effectiveness. I use a weapon swap setup with the Annihilating Light, which carries all the Discharge skill gems. The main reason being, with the massive amount of downsides that Annihilating Light has on your resistances, you'll see here my max hit drops quite significantly because I'm running this in combination with Lightning Coil and the Annihilating Light, both of which reduce my maximum resistances. Sorry, not maximum, my current resistances. It does make you quite a lot squishy. You should only swap to the Annihilating Light when you actually need to use yours Discharge, and then immediately swap back to the normal setup. So after this setup here, I've gone for a wand. Very crucially here, 28% chance to gain Arcane Surge when you deal a critical strike. This is absolutely mandatory if you're using the current setup. You could swap to an Eldritch Battery setup if you wanted to. I didn't find it was necessary because there's enough mana regen here when you've got the Arcane Surge. And also if you need this to give power to your Arcane Surge so that it procs when you switch over to the Discharge. I've gone for a Dawnbreaker just because Fizz taken as is just a completely broken stat in this game. It's absolutely busted, especially compared to the when combined, I should say, with the Lightning Coil. Fizz taken as is just an absolutely broken defensive stat, especially when you've only got 7,000 armor. I did actually at one point, instead of this, I used the Brass Dome, but I just find that this is just far more simpler. It also gives me a lot more evasion. This helmet here is just a very cheap 1C helmet I got off the market board, mainly because it just gives 1 to maximum power charges. The rest is just nice, a few defensiveness. Again, this build needs all of that, especially the chaos resistance. That's a nice little bonus. 1+1 to Summoned Holy Relics. I don't use those anymore because I don't use attack skills, so I can't proc the healing, but if you want to use those, you can. Lightning Coil doesn't really need an explanation. OP item. The gloves here, this is quite crucial, so we need a way of applying lightning exposure and cold exposure. I get cold exposure from this what do they call it, mastery here. 10% chance to inflict cold exposure on cold damage. Because you're getting so many hits with the Ice Lance, you'll pretty much proc this all the time. The lightning exposure has to come from here. If I take these gloves off, I will lose quite a lot of damage, like for example if I take off lightning exposure. Okay, I have no idea why PoB is acting like this, but when I normally use this, it goes down by quite a lot of damage. You need lightning exposure on this build, trust me. For some reason, I guess with the new update, PoB is not quite working as it should be in this regard. Okay, the rest here is just defensiveness. Again, pretty ordinary. You just got to make sure you have very high amounts of resistances on this gear where possible, and this is one of only 2 non-unique items with this build because the rest, in my opinion, are really mandatory. I would try and change some of them if I could, but I really don't think I can. Ralakesh's Impatience here, very, very effective item, just gives you the effect of maximum charges. Fantastic for crit. One of the main reasons I use it actually is because it allows me to benefit from the effects of crit on 8 power charges at once, which means my power charge on critical setup is significantly more consistent. If I took these off, I would have to build up my attack speed and my cast speed and my crit chance slowly over time, and I get very, very little uptime on those maximum charges because I'm using them to actually empower the discharge ability. So I really like Ralakesh's Impatience. You can get corrupted versions of these with extra maximum charges, but I don't have those in the moment. Badge of the Brotherhood is an absolute mandatory item on this build. It makes it so your frenzy charges are the same as your power. The rest of these effects here, you can lose charges when you use a travel skill. I'd never noticed this. I'm allocating charisma. I forgot to mention this. So charisma is all the way down here just for the extra reservation. Again, I prefer to go with this setup, but if you want to go for like an Eldritch Battery setup, you can. I just found it was a bit annoying to get high amounts of energy shield, particularly because the pressure that you have here to get all these items working is pretty contrived, I have to admit. Okay, now I've got 2 Precursors emblems. Unfortunately, I'm not rich enough to get the power charge versions, although I would absolutely love to. Very important things to take note of here in both the versions I've got. One of them here, we've got chance on frenzy charges and power charges, that if you gain one of them, you'll go up to your maximum. This massively helps with your consistency with this build. It's very important to get both. I'd say frenzy charge is a bit more important because we get power charges from more sources, like the Assassin's Mark, from the Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh thing on the, what's it called? On this thing here, the Forbidden Power. That gives you, it gives you a power charge whenever you spend mana, so that does help with the consistency there. So frenzy charges are a bit more important, but I would also get the power charge ones if you can. In my other version, I've got frenzy charges, and I've also got the thing where you get +1 to your curse limit. This allows me to use both Assassin's Mark and Elemental Weakness at the same time, which both combined together are quite a significant portion of this damage. Let's see where we're at. So if I take off my not Purity of Elements, what am I doing? Been a long day, guys. Always a long day. There we go. Take off Elemental Weakness, and yeah, it's like a 25% damage loss, and it'd be even more so if I took off Assassin's Mark. And that's the majority of this setup. I run a Mage Blood in this setup. I'll be honest, I don't think this is actually mandatory. It's just very nice to have the maximum resistances from the charges. You don't, if you need to, I can make a non-Mage Blood version and give like a 10-minute sort of video on it, but I feel like if you're already capable of understanding this build so far, then you'd probably be able to make a non-Mage Blood version on your own. If you were to remove the Mage Blood, I would maybe go for like the cooldown reduction belt, maybe some resistances so that you get the cap when you switch over to Annihilating Light. And then maybe you could sort of run these flasks with some, you could use some sort of effect. You can get flask effect enchantments on your on your belt. There's a few things you could do. I might also switch to a different shield type. For example, is it the Sapphir's Flame or something like that gives maximum resistances? There's a few things you could do there. Leave a comment if you like, and I could consider making a no Mage Blood version, but it is a very comfy item, and you don't really need to use this, to be honest. You can make a non-Mage Blood version, and aside from that, most of these items are pretty damn cheap. Like the Lightning Coil, you know, all of these you can maybe get in total for like 5-10 divines, depending on the season. Maybe not with this. The Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh are a bit more expensive. I guess it depends on the season. Maybe that might be 10-20 divines each, but they're very important for the power charges. I mean, if it wasn't for those, we would have +7 at the maximum power charges, which is actually just everything you get on the tree, plus the 1 that you get from this helmet, which that on its own would be extraordinarily cheap. I would strongly recommend you go for an 8-charge setup at least, because the difference between 7 max and 8 max is actually 60% more damage when I was testing it out, so it makes a significant difference. And of course, I just hear Urius and Naturi's Promets, mostly because the Chaos Resistance is just a bit nice. Okay, so other things to consider with this build. I should say, sorry, I do use a Watcher's Eye. This isn't the best Watcher's Eye by any means. It just, actually, to be honest, this is completely redundant now. I did used to run Determination on this build, but I found that it wasn't necessary as much as Grace was in terms of like my in-game survivability. So this is actually completely redundant now. If I could remove this, it would make very little difference. So you can add your own Watcher's Eye in there. It doesn't really matter. So, what is this build good at? What is it bad at? This build is an extraordinarily powerful Breach, Legion, Blight, Abyss farmer. Possibly Simulacrums. I haven't really tried them, to be honest, but I think given like the AoE that you get from having maximum discharges, it's pretty damn big, and it could go even higher if you're rich enough to afford like more ways of getting higher maximum power charges, for example from the +1 rings. I think it's extremely powerful for those types of content. Anything that just requires very fast, very instantaneous deletion of large amounts of powerful mobs. Essences, again, another one. I haven't tried the super juiced up essences, but I think they'll probably be fine for that as well. I will admit, however, despite the fact that I tried this very excessively, I don't think this build is the absolute best bosser. I think it's okay, like it's got enough survivability. The main issue is, you might have noticed that I don't actually have any spell suppression with this build. Like if we go back to the PoB, oops, sorry everyone. I actually don't have any spell suppression in the tree at all. It's quite tough to get it in when you've got so many unique items. You could force a way of getting spell suppression in here with like cluster jewels and maybe the spell suppression flask, but yeah, I just haven't done that. Pretty much, I just haven't done that yet. You can add that if you want to. Maybe someone who's a bit more experienced with bossing could try that out. I'll be honest, I've only tried Pinnacle bosses quite a few times. I'm still relatively new to this game. I've only been playing since halfway through what do they call it? Affliction, a couple of seasons ago. Pretty fun league. God rest in peace. I know they try and bring it back slightly. But yeah, the lack of spell suppression might hurt some of the high-end sort of players that want to get very, very consistent boss farming. And I haven't tried with the Ubers. I will say something very, very cool with this build. You can do some wild shenanigans with a certain little ability called Cast on Death. Where we are. For those that don't know, Cast on Death gives 152% more multiplier to your damage. So let's just look at this. We have Cast on Death 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you can take off Arcane Surge. You can take off Elemental Penetration also and put on Elemental Focus. And now we switch over to this build. We get 121 million. Now, I did actually do a bit of PoB warrioring to actually make a sort of uber one-shot build, and I did get this up to about 250 million, and then when you scale that to uber levels it would have ended up being a one-shot. But the only issue is I tried to test out the one-shot build on Pinnacle bosses, but I don't know if they have some kind of one-shot protection. But one thing I noticed was that no matter how powerful I made my discharge, they would always get to 50%. And no less. They would always get to a certain phase transition. They would just be immediately invulnerable, and then they would go through their phase transition and then do other things. And because for the higher damage setup, I was missing out on some of the defensiveness. For example, I used Convergence at the time instead of the Bastion of Elements. I just thought there was no reason to use that extra damage. In case anyone was wondering, that's why I don't use the Heart of Destruction, because the Convergence, not only is it a bit inconsistent with the uptime, you're using Discharge, you can actually play around that, but I just found that I didn't need the extra damage. I really didn't. This build right now is a decent bosser. It's a bit more effective at mapping just because of the instant deletion, but you do have the damage for bosses. It's more just a lack of spell suppression, so I'll leave that to those who are a bit more experienced with bossing to comment on whether they think this is a good idea. So I guess that brings us finally on to what would I suggest, or what would I like to do with this build in the future. Again, this is an Elementalist setup. It's by all means not the definitive way to play the build. It's just the way I started with. I believe the foundation for what I've got here, the way of generating charges for Supreme Grandstanding, is quite scalable. Maybe not so much with the Golems. Like, I don't know if you could apply the same Golem tech to other ascendancies, but you could consider something like a Spectre setup, for example, where you could have the Frenzy Charge and Power Charge Spectres on, if let's say you have a plus number to your maximum Spectres, like say, I don't know, maybe you have 6, you give them life taps so they have very low cooldown reduction, they're constantly applying their buffs to give out charges. You combine that with the Precursor's Emblems, which gives you a chance to gain full charges on whenever you gain a charge, and you might be able to get it so that that's your way of generating charges. You put some points into golems, and then the rest, so you put some points into spectres, and then the rest is just whatever you feel like. The reason why I didn't do that is because I'm not very experienced with spectres, and it would have took quite a lot of investment on the tree, because you have to do +1 here, +1 in the items. You might have to put in maximum resistances on things like your Indomitable Army, and I just didn't think it was worth the point investment. But maybe someone like Gatsy, who's a bit more experienced than the majority of us, can come up with something a bit cool in that regard. I think there is potential there. And in fact, if I was doing a Slayer variant, that's probably what I would go for. Some of you might ask, why didn't I go for a Slayer? Because I get this thing here, and I could get like maximum endurance charges in addition to the others. The main reason being, the best way I could work out for a Slayer was you'd have to use some kind of strength stacker. But I will say, if you use a Slayer, you may be able to use the Replica Restless Ward, is it called? The Replica Restless Ward, the one where it gives you 150 life regeneration for every endurance charge. But I think it gives you a minus number to your maximum charges. I do think though, because if you picked Masterful Form, I wonder if the two kind of cancel out. So because your maximum endurance charges is equal to your frenzy charges, the reduction to maximum endurance charges might actually not matter. So then you might be able to get, let's say, 8 charges, 8 times 150, and that's your health regen, which is completely ridiculous. As you know, it's over 1,000 just purely from that interaction alone, without the use of golems, just purely on a pure item basis. You can combine that with vitality, and you might actually be able to get 2,000 health regen. And if you make a strength stacker version and you run iron grip, where's the other one? Iron will, you might be able to do some crazy stuff. I did actually make a mana stacker variant of this in PoB. A mana stacker version might actually be a bit better, but the reason why I didn't continue with it was I couldn't get a corrupted Indigon with +1 power charges with the amount of currency that I had available, so I just had to put that one to one side. But you could absolutely do a mana stacker version of this. You could do many versions, to be honest. It's just this is the version that I settled on because it took quite a bit of theory crafting to come up with this type of build. Okay, and I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about. I guess maybe the only other thing I should say is something that can be a bit annoying with Discharge, or to be honest, all lightning damage for that matter. Let me just take off Cast on Death. That's a bit troll. You can try that out if you want. Again, it's very, very troll, but it's also quite a bit of fun. Okay, good. One thing that can be a bit annoying about Discharge, or like I say, all lightning damage, is you see the spread in lightning damage is actually very, very high. You go from just under 700,000 to 2 million. That's your roll for your damage, which means that your average hit can be anywhere between 2.5 and 5 million. So that PoB is going to assume the midpoint, but you are going to get little ups and downs with damages. On something which does 10 attacks a second, you're never going to notice that because it all averages out. But when you're doing one big instant hit like Discharge, and then you have to build up the charges again, it can be a bit tricky. Before anyone asks, unfortunately with this patch, GGG did remove the ability for Call to Arms to interact with Enduring Cry. So I actually don't have a way of generating endurance charges at the moment. I might work on that when I'm not playing Kalgura, because let's be honest, the new season is very fun. So I actually don't have a way of generating endurance charges at the moment. My Ralakesh's Impatience will still give me the defensiveness from them, but my damage does go down quite a bit when I take this off. Oh dear, what's happened here? Oh, by the way, guys, there's a bit of a bug with PoB, with Discharge weapon swap stuff when you use Cast on Death. I don't know why, it kind of bricks this calculation here for some strange reason. If you see here, it's like, yeah, 4 million, that's just ridiculous. That's not how it works, is it? Yeah, okay, there's a bug that's happened there. Just beware of that. Yeah, I'm not doing 5 million. You see, this was at 17 million on the one setup and like 50 something million, and now it's gone to 17. That's just a bug with PoB. It is what it is. But okay, that's pretty much that. I think this is a very fun build. It's not entirely 100% perfect. You could make little optimizations here and there depending on your taste. You can make a hardcore version. You can make this general idea with other classes. You don't need this exact Timeless Jewel, by the way. This is just very efficient for what it's worth. And well, you know, I had a lot of fun making this build, and the new season, no doubt I'll make something even more ridiculous. But this build's a lot of fun, so have a good day, and see you next time.